We're getting ready to start a lamppost rewire. This lamppost wire is not deep enough and is dead shorted somewhere between the house and the post. So we've got our tarps laid out and we're getting ready to start the dig. Have at it, kid. Okay, phase one probably won't show up on the video, but I've taken my flat spade and I've cut 2 grooves about 6 to 8 inches apart all the way up to the house. And the next step is to actually peel up sawed pieces, and then we'll commence our trenching. Some people say, well, why don't you just get a trencher, or why don't you get a whatever they're called, the splitter that just kind of splits in the ground. And a lot of the sprinkler guys use that and dog fence guys use it, but the problem with that is there's sprinkler system and dog fence wiring that would easily get damaged with both of those methods. So we take the hard route and we actually peel up the sod and dig a trench by hand. Now, there are some cases where we don't do that. This is about the longest distance that we'll dig by hand. It gets much further than this, and then we bring in the heavy equipment. Well, phase 2, I've removed all the top sod, and now we start trenching. Okay, here's the main reason why we do so many of these lamppost repairs. Is the wire, when it was originally installed, was basically laid right on the surface and they put sod over it, and that's it. Completely illegal by code. If it's residential, 20 amp or less, 120 volt, and is GFI protected, it has to be a minimum of 12 inches deep. If these wires were put to the proper depth from the very beginning, I'd have a lot less work to do. Okay, primary reason right here in front of us why we dig these by hand when we can. We got a sprinkler pipe that typically, when you're digging by hand, unless you're really jamming your shovel into the ground, you're not going to damage the sprinkler pipe. You're going to find it first, which is what I've done here. So again, if we would have used a machine, yeah, there'd be no hope for that sprinkler pipe. Okay, I've made my first pass, and I'm almost to depth. The ground is pretty soft and wet and is digging pretty easily. We've had some that are much more difficult with hard ground, rocks, and tree roots. Haven't ran into that yet. But I haven't commented on why we have the tarp laid out. But the tarp is to keep the dirt out of the grass, because when we backfill this and when we leave, you won't hardly be able to tell we even dug a trench. Yeah, we're pretty much done with the trench to full depth, and you can see on my trenching shovel the white tape is the markers for depth. The first one is 12 inches, 24 inches, and 36. Thankfully, we're not going 36 today, but you get a little better look at these sprinkler pipes. We ran into another one. So there's 2. One's probably the main feed, and who knows, I'm not a sprinkler guy, but you can see why we wouldn't want to bring in a machine, because we would have just cut right through them. Where digging by hand, typically you find them before you damage them. Sometimes you stick a shovel in one and they require repair, but I just wanted to show you the depth is where it should be. And where's that other wire at? I want to show you where the original wire is just barely under the sod. I guess you can kind of see where this one is. It just is barely under the sod. And we are a full 12 inches deep. So when you put it under the sod like that, it gets damaged with landscaping and yard aeration, but you put it to 12 inches and very rarely are you ever going to dig that deep. We did hit the dog fence line, but we were able to spot it, and we'll repair it before we're done. But if you would have hit that with a trencher, you'd probably never find the two ends. Now I'm getting ready to run the wire up the post. This particular post was actually mounted in concrete, and typically I don't recommend putting them in concrete just because it's not necessary. But whoever did this one actually did it correctly, except they ran the existing wire in the concrete, and concrete will attack the wire and cause it to short. So since this post is so stable, I don't need to remove it completely. But what I've done, and I don't know if it'll show up, is I've drilled a sizable hole in the bottom of the post. Now some people might just take the wire and run it right up the post, which I will do that, but I take a small piece of seal-tight conduit, flexible conduit, and that acts as a bushing so the edges of the metal pipe won't and can't damage the wire. So let's see, you can see the trench is to full 12-inch depth. It will be GFI protected. It's less than 20 amp residential, so we're to code. Okay, we've got the new cable up the pipe, or up the post. We've already installed a brand new LED rated dust to dawn sensor. Every time I do a post repair, even if the night sensor is still working, I always install a new one. And I haven't mentioned the type of wire that we're using is called UF. It is specifically made to go in the ground without a conduit. If you put regular interior Romex in the ground, it'll deteriorate in no time. But the UF has a very stiff outer casing and is, like I said, made to be put right in the ground without conduit. One other thing that I didn't point out is that whoever originally installed this lamppost wire, they didn't exit the house properly. Somewhere between the corner and about right here, they just ran it right through the brick, which is not a proper exit. Because if the line ever fails, you can't troubleshoot it, you can't disconnect it. So we've abandoned the existing line completely, and we've drilled a new hole, and we've got a piece of conduit that will show you where the line enters the house, and then if you had to disconnect it, there'll be an interior junction. But the trench is dug, the new line is in the ground, the lamp head is already reinstalled, and it's time for backfill. Yeah, another key to our success is my handmade tamping tool, which, you know, typical tamping tools that you buy at the big box stores are a lot bigger and heavier, but this is great for tamping the ground back in a trench, and we're going to put it to use today. It's part of why our jobs turn out so good. Hey, get out of my way, shovel. Now I want you to see, before I fill in the whole trench, what it looks like when I put the sod pieces back in. Right around the pole, looks perfect. Oh, something else I wanted to point out. When you're backfilling the trench, you never want to put any rocks down in the trench that can come in contact with the wire. You always want to have at least a good couple inches of dirt on top of the wire before you throw any rocks or general trash in the trench. And preferably, you're better off not putting any trash back in the trench, but sometimes you have nowhere else to put it. But always get a few inches of dirt on your wire before you start putting any rocks or debris back in the trench. Now this step, you don't want to get in a big hurry backfilling the trench. You want to go down the line, put a few inches of dirt or a little bit of, a couple of shovels, all the way down to get the wire covered up. And then you want to go back through with your tamping tool and tamp down that dirt. If you don't, you're going to have a big mound that's going to take forever for it to settle. If you tamp it down, you can put your sod pieces back in, and when you leave, you can't hardly tell you've even been here. Ooh, that's a workout. You can see that I go along the dirt pile, and to try to evenly redistribute the dirt back in the trench, I put a little bit in, a little bit in, a little bit in as I go down the trench. Then I'll go back across it and tamp it down, and then I'll do it again and tamp it, and again and tamp it, and then until all the dirt's gone. Then you put the sod pieces back in. But doing it like this does a couple different things. One, it helps you, better evenly distribute the dirt back in the trench. But two, especially on a day like today where all the dirt that we dug up was just, as wet as it could be without being all out mud, and leaving the pile out in the sun helps dry it out, which makes it easier to go back in the trench and easier to tamp it into place. When it's wet and muddy, it doesn't like to tamp. It just kind of squishes out as you're tamping it down. Get a better look at my handmade tamping tool. I took a piece of 3/4 inch galvanized rigid coupling and some 1/4 inch plate, and I cut the 1/4 inch plate in a size that makes it easy to go back into a trench, welded the coupling onto the plate, and then gave it a couple of little supports. That way it's heavy enough to tamp but light enough to not completely wear you out in a quick second. And to give you a little look of what we had to do inside, there's the GFI that we're tapping into. and we did a little what we call drywall surgery and opened up the drywall across to where we exited the house properly. And then we're in the process of putting the drywall pieces back in, which makes it a lot easier for the homeowner to patch and repair. We don't do the mud and repair, but most guys just take the claw into their hammer and just start ripping holes if they have to get into the drywall. But yeah, we do a much better job than that. You can see the tamping is carrying on and the sod's going back in the trench. Looking great. Last view from this end. You can't hardly even tell we dug that up. See how the inside looks. Absolutely outstanding. And with it being a garage, you know, that little cut in the drywall, I doubt that the homeowner will ever even fix it. All right, that's a wrap, guys. We got to figure up the bill and get the you-know-what out of here, and on to the next one.